In 1980, one factory complex in Warren, Ohio, employed 14,500 people, building the nervous system of nearly every car in America. Walk into any General Motors vehicle rolling off the line in Detroit, and you'd find Packard Electric wiring running through its veins. The company that started with light bulbs in 1890 had become the world's largest manufacturer of automotive electrical components. 13,000 hourly workers clocked in daily at the sprawling campus along North River Road. Another 1,500 engineers and managers kept the operation humming. The plant produced millions of wire harnesses, ignition cables, and electrical connectors each year. Packard Electric wasn't just Warren's largest employer. It was the economic engine of the entire Mahoning Valley. Then something went catastrophically wrong. By 2005, the company declared bankruptcy. The parking lots that once required 30 minutes just to exit at shift change sat empty. Buildings that hummed with the sound of stamping presses and assembly lines fell silent. The 14,500 jobs, down to 660. The global headquarters moved to England. The work shipped to Mexico, then China. Today, only 4 plants remain operational in Warren, shadows of the empire that once dominated the electrical component industry. So how does a company that defined modern automotive wiring for a century collapse in less than 2 decades? How do brothers who invented better light bulbs create an industrial giant, only to watch it bleed to death from 1,000 cuts? And what happens to a city when its brightest lights finally go out? This is the story of Packard Electric. A tale of innovation, dominance, globalization, and betrayal. Of a company that electrified America's highways, then abandoned the workers who built it. Welcome inside the Warren, Ohio factory complex, where American manufacturing died one wire at a time. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. This is one of the most important stories of American industrial decline you've never heard. 1890. Warren, Ohio. 2 brothers stood inside a 2-story building on North Avenue, watching incandescent lamps flicker to life on the production line. James Ward Packard, age 27, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and made notes in his engineering journal. His brother, William Doud Packard, age 29, reviewed the company's first sales orders. Around them, a dozen employees worked to manufacture carbon arc lamps using designs James had patented after working at Sawyerman Electric Company in New York. The Packard Electric Company had just been born. The brothers came from industrial royalty in Warren. Their father, Warren Packard, was a successful hardware store owner and entrepreneur who had built a small fortune in the booming Ohio town. He'd encouraged both sons to pursue education and innovation. William attended Ohio State University for 1 year before returning to work in the family business, learning the practical side of commerce and management. James took the academic route, graduating from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania in 1884 with a mechanical engineering degree. After graduation, both brothers went to work at Sawyerman Electric Company. James rose quickly through the ranks, eventually running the plant. During his time there, he earned his first 2 patents for improvements to incandescent lamp design. He saw problems others ignored. He understood that longer-lasting bulbs with better filaments would dominate the market. William worked on the administrative side, mastering the business operations that would prove crucial to their future success. In 1890, they made a calculated decision. Warren was installing its first electric generating plant. The electrical era was dawning. Their father could see it. So could they. With financial backing from Warren Packard, the brothers returned home and founded Packard Electric Company with a singular focus: build better light bulbs than anyone else in America. The initial operation was modest: 10 employees, a 200-foot front section in a 2-story structure on North Avenue. The subsidiary New York and Ohio Company, located on North Street, handled actual production of the lamps, while Packard Electric managed design and distribution. James focused obsessively on product development, creating longer-lasting bulbs that outperformed competitors. William traveled the country promoting their products, securing contracts, building relationships with distributors. By 1896, just 6 years after founding, Packard Electric expanded significantly. They installed electrical transformer production lines, diversifying beyond just lamps. Revenue climbed steadily. The Warren facility grew. More employees were hired. The Packard name became synonymous with quality electrical products across Ohio and beyond. But here's the thing. James Packard wasn't satisfied with light bulbs alone. His engineering mind constantly sought new challenges. He'd been watching developments in a nascent industry that most people considered a novelty for the wealthy, the automobile. In 1898, James purchased the 12th horseless carriage manufactured by Alexander Winton's company in Cleveland. He planned to drive it the 60 miles back to Warren, a journey that should have taken a few hours. Instead, it took 3 days. The car kept breaking down. Electrical failures plagued the trip. When James finally limped back to Warren, he was furious, not at Winton, but at the poor engineering. As a mechanical engineer, he couldn't accept such shoddy workmanship. He traveled back to Cleveland with suggestions for improvements. Winton's response was dismissive. "If you think you can do better, build your own." Challenge accepted. What Winton didn't realize was that he'd just awakened something in James Ward Packard that would change automotive history. And in a corner of the New York and Ohio lamp plant, something revolutionary was about to happen. The 6th of November, 1899, Warren, Ohio. The first Packard automobile rolled through the streets of Warren, its engine puffing steadily, drawing crowds of amazed onlookers. James Packard sat behind the steering wheel, William beside him, both brothers grinning as they demonstrated that they had indeed built something better than Winton's car. The vehicle had been constructed in the corner of the New York and Ohio lamp plant, using the same engineering precision James applied to light bulb design. The car wasn't just functional, it was superior. James had applied his electrical engineering expertise to solve the exact problems that had plagued his Winton purchase. The ignition system worked reliably. The electrical components didn't fail. The design was cleaner, more efficient, more thoughtfully engineered. Word spread quickly through Warren and beyond about the quality Packard automobile. But turning a single car into a business required more than engineering genius. It required capital, manufacturing expertise, and business connections the brothers didn't yet possess. In September 1900, James and William formed a partnership with George Louis Weiss, a Winton Company investor who believed in their vision. They incorporated as the Ohio Automobile Company, with 5 partners contributing capital to construct a proper factory in Warren. The first Packard automobiles were built using the same facilities that produced electrical components. This wasn't coincidental. The brothers understood that automotive manufacturing and electrical component manufacturing shared fundamental processes and skills. Workers who could assemble precise electrical lamps could be trained to assemble precision automobile parts. The overlap was strategic. By 1901, Packard added cable and wire manufacturing to their electrical business. They weren't just making lamps anymore. They were producing the electrical infrastructure that automobiles desperately needed. This development would prove prophetic. While others saw automobiles and electrical components as separate industries, the Packards understood they were fundamentally connected. In 1902, everything changed. Henry Bourne-Joy, a member of one of Detroit's wealthiest families, was traveling to New York when he witnessed 2 Packard automobiles chase down a horse-drawn fire wagon. Fascinated by their speed and reliability, he purchased the only Packard in New York City. Impressed, he visited the Warren headquarters and saw the operation firsthand. Joy saw potential the brothers couldn't fully realize on their own. He enlisted a group of wealthy Detroit investors, including his brother-in-law Truman Handy Newberry and Russell A. Alger Jr. On the 2nd of October 1902, the group refinanced the company, renaming it the Packard Motor Car Company. James Packard remained president, but this was largely ceremonial. Joy and his Detroit investors controlled day-to-day operations. The decision that followed was inevitable but painful. In 1903, Packard Motor Car Company relocated to Detroit. Most of the new investors were Detroit-based. The city offered proximity to steel, tire manufacturers, and other automotive suppliers. Detroit was becoming the center of the automotive universe. Warren couldn't compete with those advantages. But here's what most historians miss. The brothers didn't abandon Warren entirely. While Packard Motor Car Company moved to Detroit, James and William Packard kept Packard Electric Company in Warren. They made a strategic choice to separate the two businesses. The automobile company would chase luxury car buyers in Detroit. The electrical company would focus on what they did best: automotive electrical systems, wiring, and components. In 1902, they sold the incandescent bulb business to a company that was later acquired by General Electric. Now Packard Electric could focus entirely on automotive electrical components, cables, wiring harnesses, ignition systems. The very components that every automobile manufacturer desperately needed. The Packard brothers had just positioned themselves to dominate an industry that barely existed yet. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. 1917, Warren, Ohio. Inside the expanded Packard Electric facility, engineers solved a problem that had plagued automotive manufacturers since the industry's birth. Every car on the road suffered from the same electrical failure. Ozone gas emissions from high-voltage cables deteriorated rubber insulation on spark plugs, causing the wires to arc and fail. Breakdowns were constant. Reliability was impossible. The industry accepted this as an unavoidable cost of the new technology. James Packard saw it differently. His team developed the Packard Lacquard cable, a revolutionary design that used a specialized lacquer coating to seal the cable from ozone gas exposure. The solution was elegant, effective, and immediately successful. The Lacquard cable became the automotive industry standard virtually overnight. Every major manufacturer wanted Packard cables in their vehicles. Quality automotive wiring suddenly meant Packard wiring. This single innovation transformed Packard Electric from a regional electrical component supplier into a dominant force in the automotive industry. Orders flooded in from Detroit, from smaller manufacturers across the Midwest, from anyone building automobiles who wanted reliable electrical systems. The Warren facility expanded. Hundreds of new workers were hired. Production lines multiplied. By the early 1920s, Packard Electric employed thousands of workers in Warren. The company manufactured not just cables, but complete wiring harnesses, ignition systems, and electrical components for cars, trucks, and even early aircraft. The Dana Street complex grew building by building as demand increased. Warren's identity began shifting from a general industrial town to a specialized center for automotive electrical components. The relationship between Packard Motor Car Company in Detroit and Packard Electric in Warren remained strong, though the businesses operated independently. Packard automobiles used Packard Electric components, creating a vertical integration advantage. But Packard Electric didn't limit itself to supplying only Packard cars. They sold to any manufacturer willing to pay for quality. This diversification strategy provided stability. When the Packard Motor Car Company faced challenges in the luxury automobile market during the 1920s and 1930s, Packard Electric continued growing by supplying the entire automotive industry. While the car company dealt with competition from Cadillac, Pierce Arrow, and other luxury brands, the electrical company benefited from the overall growth of automobile production in America. The Depression hit luxury car manufacturers particularly hard. Peerless shut down in 1932. Pierce Arrow would follow in 1938. But Packard Electric survived because they weren't selling luxury products to wealthy buyers. They sold essential components to manufacturers who needed them, regardless of economic conditions. Cars required wiring. Packard made the best wiring. Simple economics kept them profitable when others failed. Then, in 1932, a deal was struck that would define the next 60 years. General Motors Corporation acquired Packard Electric Company for an undisclosed sum. The brothers were ready to sell. James Ward Packard had died in 1928. William Doud Packard had died in 1923. The company was now run by Newton Wolcott and other executives who saw the wisdom in joining the largest automotive manufacturer in the world. For General Motors, the acquisition made strategic sense. They needed reliable, high-quality electrical components for their growing empire of car brands: Chevrolet, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Cadillac. Owning their electrical supplier meant cost control, supply security, and vertical integration. For Packard Electric, it meant guaranteed demand, capital for expansion, and the backing of an industrial giant. Warren, Ohio would remain the headquarters and main manufacturing center. The Dana Street complex would continue growing. The Packard name would stay on the plant. But now they were part of something bigger, much bigger. And for the next 4 decades, Packard Electric would thrive under the General Motors umbrella, becoming the largest manufacturer of automotive electrical components in the entire world. 1952, Warren, Ohio. The 12th expansion of the Packard Electric complex was completed, featuring a gleaming new administration building and a massive manufacturing addition. The Dana Street campus now stretched across multiple city blocks, an industrial fortress that employed over 6,500 workers producing automotive wiring for General Motors vehicles, rolling off assembly lines from Detroit to California. This was Packard Electric at its absolute peak, dominant, profitable, and essential to American automotive manufacturing. The post-World War II boom had been spectacular for the company. During the war, Packard Electric had manufactured electrical components for military vehicles, aircraft, and communications equipment. When peace came and Americans started buying cars again in record numbers, Packard Electric was perfectly positioned to supply the wiring, cables, and electrical systems that every vehicle required. By the 1950s, Packard Electric had become synonymous with quality. Their wiring harnesses were considered the industry standard. Their ignition cables were unmatched. Their electrical connectors set the benchmark others tried to meet. General Motors relied on Warren to supply electrical components for millions of vehicles annually. The relationship was symbiotic and highly profitable. In 1955, Packard opened its first manufacturing facility outside Warren, a new plant on North River Road in Bezetta Township. The expansion signaled the company's growth beyond its original Dana Street campus. More space was needed. More workers were required. Production volumes kept climbing. The North River Road plant would eventually grow to over 800,000 square feet of manufacturing space. The 1960s brought continued expansion. In 1964, Packard Electric opened the Engineering and Research Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to developing the next generation of automotive electrical components. The center attracted top engineering talent from across the country. Patents were filed regularly. Innovations emerged continuously. Packard maintained its technical edge through constant investment in research and development. In 1966, a large addition at the North River Road complex created even more manufacturing capacity. The company was now operating multiple massive facilities in the Warren area, all coordinated from the Dana Street headquarters. Employment kept growing. By the 1970s, Packard Electric employed over 13,000 hourly workers, plus thousands more in salaried positions. Total employment exceeded 14,500 people. Warren had become completely dependent on Packard Electric. The company was the largest employer in Trumbull County. Entire neighborhoods consisted of Packard workers and their families. Downtown businesses thrived because of Packard paychecks. Local government relied on Packard tax revenue. When Packard announced hiring, thousands of applicants would form lines snaking out the door. Landing a job at Packard meant security, good wages, excellent benefits, and retirement with a General Motors pension. The company culture was strong. Multi-generational families worked at Packard. Grandparents, parents, and children all employed at the same complex, sometimes in the same department. The union, IUE-CWA Local 717, negotiated solid contracts that protected workers and ensured fair treatment. Management and labor generally worked cooperatively. The job was hard, the hours were long, but the stability was unmatched. In 1975, Packard Electric developed the high-energy ignition system in cooperation with Delco Remy, a breakthrough that improved engine performance across the automotive industry. The HEI system became standard equipment on General Motors engines throughout the 1980s, cementing Packard's reputation for innovation. But here's what nobody saw coming in the mid-1970s. The golden age was about to end. In 1973, Packard opened plants in Clinton and Brookhaven, Mississippi, seeking lower-cost labor outside Ohio. It seemed like standard business expansion at the time. It was actually the first step toward abandonment. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into American industrial history. 1978, Ciudad Juárez, Mexico. Packard Electric opened Conductores y Componentes Eléctricos, designated Plant 31, along the dusty border across from El Paso, Texas. The facility was modest compared to the sprawling Warren complex, but it represented something profound. Packard Electric was going international. Company executives called it a global expansion initiative. Workers in Warren called it something else, a warning sign written in Spanish. The Mexico decision wasn't made lightly. General Motors was under pressure. Japanese automakers were eating market share with more fuel-efficient vehicles. Labor costs in the United States kept rising. Foreign competitors were building cars with lower-cost components. GM needed cost savings across every division. Packard Electric, despite its dominance, wasn't immune to these pressures. The official justification was sensible. Mexican plants would handle less skilled, labor-intensive assembly work, while Warren would focus on high-tech engineering, complex manufacturing, and innovation. The Mexico workers would make simple wiring harnesses. Ohio workers would make sophisticated electrical systems. Both facilities would prosper. Nobody would lose jobs. It was win-win. Except that wasn't how it worked. Plant 31 inches. Juarez was just the beginning. By 1980, Packard Electric operated multiple facilities in Ciudad Juarez. By the mid-1990s, they had over 40 plants in the Maquiladora zone. Mexican workers earned a fraction of Warren wages, sometimes less than 1/10. The labor cost savings were enormous. General Motors executives looked at the numbers and saw a simple equation. Every job moved to Mexico saved money that improved quarterly results and executive bonuses. Meanwhile, in Warren, workers started noticing subtle changes. Certain product lines disappeared from their plants. Rumors circulated about work being transferred to Mexico. Union representatives demanded explanations and received reassurances that Warren remained the company's core. Management insisted Mexican expansion wouldn't reduce Ohio employment, but the numbers told a different story. In the early 1980s, Packard Electric became GM's leading producer of wire harnesses and electrical components globally. They dominated the industry. Their components went into millions of vehicles annually. But while production volumes increased, Warren employment began a slow, almost imperceptible decline. Products were still being made, just increasingly in Mexico, where labor costs were drastically lower. By 1990, Packard Electric celebrated its 100th anniversary with the opening of the National Packard Museum in Warren. It was a celebration of heritage, innovation, and community impact. Speeches were given, praising the company's commitment to Warren. The future seemed secure, but behind the celebrations, the employment trend was clear. Jobs were leaving. In 1991, Packard Electric became part of Delphi Automotive Systems, a General Motors division consolidating various supplier operations. The reorganization was sold as modernization and efficiency. In reality, it was GM's preparation for an even more dramatic move, spinning off its supplier divisions entirely. Workers felt the ground shifting beneath them. The company they'd trusted for decades, the company their fathers and grandfathers had worked for, the company that had promised stability, that company was changing. The name was still Packard Electric. The buildings were still in Warren, but something fundamental had broken. The parking lots at shift change weren't quite as crowded anymore. The lunch crowds at downtown Warren restaurants had thinned slightly. The line of job applicants had shortened, and in Ciudad Juarez, Packard plants kept opening, one after another after another. The brightest lights in Warren were starting to dim. The 1st of October 1999, Troy, Michigan. General Motors announced the spin-off of Delphi Automotive Systems as a separate, independent company. The decision affected 29 manufacturing facilities, 51 joint ventures, 11 technical centers, and approximately 211,000 employees worldwide. Packard Electric, now officially Delphi Packard Electric Systems, was no longer protected by General Motors ownership. They would sink or swim on their own. For Wall Street, the spin-off made perfect sense. GM could focus on vehicle assembly while suppliers competed in the open market. Delphi would have freedom to sell components to any automaker, not just GM. Shareholders would benefit from increased efficiency and market-driven pricing. The business logic was sound. For Warren workers, the spin-off felt like betrayal. They'd spent careers building components for General Motors vehicles. Their pensions were GM pensions. Their health care was GM healthcare. Their job security came from being part of the largest automotive manufacturer in America. Suddenly, none of that was guaranteed. Delphi was a standalone supplier, competing against global manufacturers who paid workers $1 an hour in China and Thailand. The anxiety was immediate and justified. Within months of the spin-off, Delphi accelerated investment in overseas facilities. The company had already been expanding in Mexico throughout the 1990s. Now, freed from GM ownership, they moved even faster. By the early 2000s, Delphi operated massive manufacturing complexes in Ciudad Juarez, employing tens of thousands of Mexican workers. They built a $350 million research and development center in Shanghai, China. They opened facilities across Asia, where labor costs made Warren's wages look absurdly expensive. Bruce Gump, a Warren worker, who'd started at Packard in the 1970s, watched the transformation with growing anger. He'd worked when Packard employed 14,500 people in the Mahoning Valley. He'd seen the parking lots overflow at shift change, seen downtown Warren buzzing with activity, seen the company as a pillar of the community. Now he watched jobs disappear by the hundreds, then thousands. "It really is hard to put into words," Gump said years later. "We were all part of General Motors, and we did our best to make GM successful. Then they just discarded us." The spin-off exposed a brutal reality. Packard Electric's value to General Motors had been its low-cost components. Once Delphi became independent, the only way to maintain that low cost was to move production wherever labor was cheapest. Warren couldn't compete with Ciudad Juarez. Ciudad Juarez couldn't compete with Shanghai. The race to the bottom had started, and American manufacturing was losing. Employment in Warren continued its steady decline. 14,500 total employees dropped to 10,000, then 8,000, then 5,000. The North River Road complex that once required 3 parking lot structures struggled to fill one. The Dana Street buildings that had expanded 12 times started closing sections. In 2001, the IUE International Union merged with the CWA, Communication Workers of America, becoming IUE CWA, Local 717. The union tried to fight the outsourcing but had limited leverage. Delphi could credibly threaten to move even more work overseas if labor demands were too aggressive. The union faced an impossible choice: accept concessions or watch jobs leave faster. Workers who'd expected to retire from Packard Electric suddenly faced uncertainty. Some took buyouts, accepting reduced pensions to leave early. Others held on, hoping the bleeding would stop. It wouldn't. The worst was yet to come. Because Delphi Packard Electric Systems wasn't just declining, it was dying. And nobody in corporate management seemed willing to stop it. 2003. Warren, Ohio. Nick Dragojevic walked through the North River Road plant, past rows of silent machinery that had once hummed with continuous operation. He'd started at Packard Electric in 1972, fresh out of Warren Reserve High School, making $5.12 an hour. It had seemed like a fortune compared to his previous job at a downtown theater for $1 an hour. His father, a steelworker, had advised him to take the Packard job. "You don't want any part of the steel mills," he'd said. Now, 31 years later, Dragojevic wondered if that advice still held true. The plant that had employed his sister since 1969 and his other sister who he'd referred for a position was hollowing out. Entire production lines had been dismantled and shipped to Mexico. Buildings that once operated 3 shifts now sat dark. The cafeteria that had been packed with workers at lunch served a fraction of its previous customers. Across the Mahoning Valley, the impact was catastrophic. Warren's downtown businesses that had thrived on Packard paychecks started closing. Restaurants saw lunchtime crowds evaporate. Retail stores lost their customer base. Property values declined as Packard workers sold homes and moved elsewhere seeking employment. The economic multiplier effect that had made Packard Electric such a community asset was now working in reverse. Every lost Packard job killed 3 others in the local economy. By 2004, employment at the Warren facilities had dropped below 5,000 workers. More than 9,000 jobs had vanished in just 5 years since the GM spinoff. The Dana Street complex that had once been the beating heart of Warren's economy was becoming a ghost town. Entire buildings stood empty, their windows dark, their parking lots barren. The company's global strategy was working brilliantly for executives. Delphi was profitable, competitive, and expanding internationally. Their Mexican facilities were highly productive. Their Asian operations provided access to growing markets. Their cost structure allowed them to compete with any supplier globally. Wall Street analysts praised Delphi's transformation from a high-cost GM subsidiary into a lean, globally competitive parts manufacturer. But in Warren, the success story felt like a funeral. Workers who'd spent careers at Packard Electric found themselves with obsolete skills nobody wanted. A 55-year-old machinist who'd run the same wire harness production line for 30 years couldn't easily transition to another industry. Warren didn't have other major employers hiring at scale. The steel industry had already collapsed. The automotive suppliers were all moving overseas. What was left? Some workers accepted buyout packages, one-time payments, and reduced pensions in exchange for leaving early. For many, it was an impossible decision. Take the buyout and lose years of pension accrual, or stay and risk losing everything if the plant closed completely. Most who could afford to leave did. Those who couldn't afford to leave, or were too close to full retirement, hung on, watching colleagues disappear month after month. The union fought the decline but lacked power. Delphi management could credibly argue that higher labor costs would just accelerate outsourcing, give concessions, or watch more jobs leave. It was extortion disguised as negotiation. By the middle of 2005, rumors circulated that Delphi was in serious financial trouble despite its global expansion. The cost savings from overseas operations hadn't been enough. Competition was fierce. Pricing pressure from automakers was brutal. Something catastrophic was coming. Everyone could feel it. Nobody wanted to believe it. The 8th of October, 2005. Warren, Ohio. Delphi Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, making it one of the largest manufacturing bankruptcies in American history. The filing affected 185,000 employees worldwide, including thousands still working at the Warren facilities. Pensions were immediately thrown into doubt. Healthcare benefits became uncertain. Job security evaporated completely. The company that had been Warren's economic foundation for over a century had just collapsed. The bankruptcy wasn't a surprise to anyone paying attention. Delphi had been losing money for years despite its global expansion. Moving production to low-cost countries had reduced labor expenses, but it hadn't solved fundamental problems. Intense competition from Asian suppliers, pricing pressure from automakers, high legacy costs from American retirees, and a general overcapacity in the global automotive supply industry. But for Warren workers, the bankruptcy was still devastating. Bruce Gump stood at Plant 8 on Griswold Street, looking at the quiet stillness where decades of activity had once dominated. There were so many people, he recalled. Lunchtime was buzzing. The businesses were packed with people coming and going. When the company went down, the whole area spiraled down with it. It's never been the same. The bankruptcy process was brutal. Delphi used Chapter 11 protection to tear up union contracts, reduce pension obligations, and eliminate healthcare coverage for retirees. Workers who'd been promised lifetime benefits suddenly faced medical costs that wiped out retirement savings. The bankruptcy court approved nearly everything Delphi requested. Creditors got paid. Executives received restructuring bonuses. Workers got destroyed. Employment in Warren plummeted. During the bankruptcy, Delphi closed multiple facilities and eliminated thousands of positions. The North River Road complex that had once employed 13,000 hourly workers alone shrank to a fraction of that size. Entire buildings were shuttered. Equipment was sold off or scrapped. Decades of manufacturing infrastructure was liquidated. The company that emerged from bankruptcy in October 2009 was dramatically different. Delphi Automotive plc was now based in Gillingham, England, though executive operations remained in Troy, Michigan. Warren was no longer headquarters for anything. The city had been demoted to just another manufacturing location, and an increasingly unnecessary one at that. By 2010, employment at the Warren facilities had dropped to approximately 1,500 workers. From a peak of 14,500 employees to barely one-tenth that number in just a decade. The economic devastation was profound. Warren's population declined as workers moved elsewhere seeking employment. The tax base collapsed, forcing cuts to city services. Schools struggled with declining enrollment and reduced funding. Downtown became increasingly vacant. John Russo, coordinator of the Center for Working Class Studies at Youngstown State University, studied the impact. Delphi's story is the story of corporate restructuring and the impact on people in the community, he observed. Packard Electric's operations once employed more than 14,500 people. Beginning in the late 1970s, Delphi began to shift production to Mexico. By the mid-1990s, the company accelerated investment in Ciudad Juarez, where workers were paid far less than in the United States. The promised preservation of high-skilled jobs in Warren, while Mexico handled low-skilled work? Complete fiction. Engineering jobs moved overseas too. The Shanghai R&D Center had more engineers than Warren within years. The company had lied consistently about its intentions, and workers had believed them because the alternative that Packard Electric would actually abandon Warren seemed impossible. But the impossible had happened. 2002. Warren, Ohio. 10 years after the bankruptcy filing, former Delphi employees gathered at Plant 8 on Griswold Street for a somber anniversary. They shared memories of when the complex bustled with activity, when downtown Warren was vibrant, when Packard Electric meant security and prosperity. Now they looked at the same building standing mostly empty, windows dark, parking lots deserted. Brian Lutz, shop chairman of IUECWA, Local 717, faced a problem. Previous union leaders never imagined. Nobody wanted to work at Delphi anymore. They were supposed to hire 6 people recently, he said. 2 showed up. A job that once drew 2,000 applicants now struggled to find anyone willing to accept employment. The company's betrayal had destroyed its reputation in the Mahoning Valley. The membership in Local 717 had dwindled to approximately 660 workers spread across just 4 remaining facilities. 3 plants were incorporated into a single building on North River Road. Plant 7 manufacturing plastic resin, Plant 1 metal stamping, and Plant 1 Xerocable manufacturing. Plant 47 inches Vienna Township manufactured plastic connectors. Everything else was gone. The physical complex had been gutted. The Dana Street buildings that had expanded 12 times over a century were mostly demolished or sold off. A former 800,000 square foot manufacturing building was now used by B.J. Allen Company as a fireworks warehouse. The middle section of the North River Road complex had been razed. What remained was less than half the original footprint. The surviving workers operated more efficiently than ever, which somehow made the collapse even more bitter. Plant 47 was the most efficient plastics molding plant in the world, according to union officials. Plant 7's production lines were splitting at the seams with work, running 30 million pounds per year against a design capacity of 24 million. Plant 10 manufactured technologically advanced cable for modern vehicles with sophisticated electrical systems. But efficiency couldn't save them. In January 2018, Delphi split into 2 entities, Delphi Technologies and Aptiv plc. Warren operations became part of Aptiv, which focused on developing advanced electronics and electrical distribution systems for next-generation vehicles. The company continued its pattern of outsourcing, offshoring, and constant restructuring. Workers who'd survived the bankruptcy, the layoffs, the plant closures, and the constant uncertainty found themselves in an industrial wasteland. The Warren they'd known the city of modern methods, the electrical manufacturing capital, the Packard Electric town, no longer existed. What replaced it was a struggling Rust Belt community with high unemployment, declining population, and limited prospects. The National Packard Museum on Mahoning Avenue remained as a memorial to what had been. Visitors could see exhibits on the Packard brothers, the company's innovations, the products that had defined automotive electrical systems for a century. They could learn about the Packard cable, the HEI ignition system, the wiring harnesses that had powered millions of American vehicles. They could see photographs of the sprawling complex at its peak. What they couldn't see was a future, because Packard Electric didn't have one. The company that had electrified American highways, that had employed 14,500 people in one Ohio city, that had defined automotive wiring for generations, that company was effectively dead. The name survived in corporate reorganizations and spin-offs. The buildings remained, mostly empty. A few hundred workers still clocked in each day. But the empire was over. The lights were going out, and nobody was coming to turn them back on. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. 2002, Ciudad Juárez, Mexico. The Delphi Packard Electric Mexico Technical Center opened its doors. A state-of-the-art research and development facility designed to engineer automotive electrical systems for the global market. The center employed hundreds of engineers, many trained in the United States, or Mexico's best technical universities, who designed prototypes, developed manufacturing processes, and coordinated with the Ciudad Juárez assembly plants. Everything Warren used to do, Mexico was now doing cheaper. This wasn't simple assembly work anymore. When Packard first opened Plant 31 Inches Juárez in 1978, executives had promised Warren workers that only low-skilled, labor-intensive work would move south. Complex engineering, sophisticated manufacturing, and high-tech development would remain in Ohio. For a few years, that was partially true. But as Mexican facilities matured and Mexican engineers proved themselves capable, the distinction collapsed entirely. By the early 2000s, Juárez wasn't just assembling wiring harnesses designed in Warren. Juárez was designing the harnesses. Juárez was developing new products. Juárez was running the technical center. The promise that Warren would retain high-value work while Mexico handled basic assembly had been a lie, perhaps from the beginning. Delphi's investment in the maquiladora sector accelerated dramatically after the 1999 GM spin-off. At its peak, Delphi operated over 40 facilities in the Juárez area, employing tens of thousands of workers. The company became Ciudad Juárez's largest private employer. The entire city's economy revolved around automotive parts manufacturing, particularly electrical components. The labor cost advantage was staggering. A Juárez worker earned approximately one-tenth what a Warren worker made. Benefits were minimal. Healthcare costs were negligible. Retirement obligations were non-existent. Delphi could hire 10 Mexican workers for the cost of one American worker, and those 10 workers could be trained to do the same job. But Mexico wasn't the end of the offshoring story. As wages in the maquiladora zone rose through the 2000s, still far below American levels, but higher than they'd been, Delphi turned to Asia. China offered even cheaper labor than Mexico. India provided highly educated engineers at a fraction of American salaries. The company opened massive facilities in Shanghai and other Chinese cities. They established engineering centers in Bangalore and Hyderabad. The pattern was clear. Delphi chased the lowest possible labor costs wherever they existed. When one country's wages rose, they moved to the next. They had no loyalty to communities, no commitment to workers, no connection to the regions that had built the company. Quarterly earnings reports and executive bonuses were the only metrics that mattered. From a pure business efficiency standpoint, the strategy worked. Delphi maintained profitability despite intense competition. They supplied electrical components to automotive manufacturers worldwide. They operated in dozens of countries. They employed hundreds of thousands of people globally. The company was technically successful. But here's what the business efficiency metrics didn't measure: the destruction of Warren, Ohio, the collapse of the Mahoning Valley economy, the devastation of families who'd worked for Packard Electric for generations, the loss of skilled manufacturing knowledge that took a century to build, the betrayal of workers who'd been promised security if they just worked hard and remained loyal. None of that appeared on Delphi's balance sheet. None of that affected executive compensation. None of that mattered to Wall Street analysts. And by the time Warren workers understood that their loyalty meant nothing, It was far too late to do anything about it. The empire had been deliberately dismantled. Not collapsed, dismantled. 2010. Warren, Ohio. A former Delphi employee walked across the nearly empty parking lot at the North River Road complex, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He'd worked at Packard Electric for 34 years before retiring in the mid-2000s. Looking at the deserted lot, he felt a profound sense of loss. At its peak, nearly 15,000 American workers filed through these doors, he reflected. The huge parking lot that I gazed upon, once filled to its capacity with American workers, now looked like a deserted scene from an apocalyptic movie. The human stories behind the statistics were devastating. Consider the multi-generational families who'd built their lives around Packard Electric, grandparents who'd worked there in the 1940s and 1950s, parents who'd started in the 1960s and 1970s, children who'd gotten jobs in the 1980s and 1990s, 3 generations employed at the same company, sometimes in the same buildings, sharing the same cafeteria, parking in the same lots. When Packard collapsed, these families lost more than jobs. They lost identity, community, and purpose. A grandfather who'd spent 40 years at Packard Electric watched his grandson laid off after just 15 years. The grandson had been told that Packard was secure, that his job was safe, that loyalty would be rewarded. All lies. Workers in their 52nds faced impossible situations. Too young to retire with full pensions, but too old to easily find new employment. Their specialized skills, running specific wire harness machines, assembling electrical components using Packard's proprietary methods, were worthless outside the company. What was a 55-year-old wire harness specialist supposed to do in Warren, Ohio, when Packard was gone and no other major employers remained? Some took buyouts that reduced their expected retirement income by 30–40%. Better to take something now than risk losing everything if the plant closed completely. Others held on desperately, hoping things would improve, watching their health deteriorate from stress while their retirement security crumbled. The women who'd worked at Packard faced particular challenges. Judy Watson worked from 1971 to 2003. Ruth Meeker Emerson from 1967 to 1998. Arvada Giddix accumulated 25 years across multiple periods, from the 1950s through 1980s. They remembered when Packard was one of Warren's most dynamic and progressive companies, a place where workers acted like a community. The panel discussion they participated in at the National Packard Museum years after leaving was bittersweet, remembering the good times while acknowledging the betrayal. Retirees faced their own crisis. Workers who'd retired before the bankruptcy had been promised lifetime healthcare coverage. General Motors had guaranteed it. Packard Electric had honored it for decades. Then Delphi's bankruptcy eliminated those benefits. Retirees suddenly faced hundreds or thousands of dollars monthly in healthcare premiums they couldn't afford. Some were forced back into the workforce in their 60 and 70 just to pay medical bills. Others went without necessary care, their health deteriorating because they couldn't afford treatment. The pension situation was equally grim. While the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, PBGC, ultimately backed most pensions after the bankruptcy, benefit levels were reduced. Workers who'd expected $3,000 monthly got $2,200. The difference between comfortable retirement and struggling to pay bills. "It really is hard to put into words," said Bruce Gump, reflecting on the betrayal. "We were all part of General Motors, and we did our best to make GM successful. Their reward was abandonment." The American flag at the plant entrance looked different to workers after the bankruptcy. "I felt a bitter sense of betrayal and anger," one employee wrote. "Not toward my country, which this flag proudly represents, but a company that seemingly manipulated and exploited the freedoms that the flag stands for." The contrast tells the entire story of American industrial decline in a single city. In 1980, Warren was the city of modern methods, a thriving manufacturing center where steady paychecks supported a vibrant downtown, excellent schools, and a strong middle class. By 2020, Warren was a Rust Belt city with high unemployment, declining population, and a crumbling infrastructure that symbolized broken promises. Walk through downtown Warren in 1980, and you'd find bustling lunch crowds, full parking meters, thriving retail stores, and restaurants packed with Packard Electric workers spending their paychecks. The Packard Music Hall hosted concerts and events. Local businesses prospered. Property values were strong. Young people stayed in Warren because jobs were abundant. The city was alive. Walk through the same streets in 2020, and you'd find vacant storefronts, empty sidewalks, struggling restaurants with sparse customers, and parking lots with more weeds than cars. The Packard Music Hall still stood, a remnant of better times, but the economic engine that had sustained the community was gone. Young people left Warren for cities with actual employment opportunities. Those who stayed often struggled with poverty. The population data shows the collapse clearly. Warren's population peaked at nearly 50,000 residents in the 1970s when Packard Electric was thriving. By 2020, the population had dropped below 40,000. Over 10,000 people, 20% of the city, had left, and those who remained were older, poorer, and more dependent on social services than previous generations. The tax base destruction was catastrophic. Packard Electric had been Warren's largest taxpayer by far. When employment dropped from 14,500 to 660, property tax revenue collapsed. The city couldn't maintain its infrastructure. Roads deteriorated, streetlights went dark, public services were cut repeatedly. Schools struggled with declining enrollment and reduced funding. The downward spiral seemed unstoppable. The ripple effects extended throughout Trumbull County. Packard Electric workers had supported restaurants, retail stores, car dealerships, home construction, and countless other businesses. When Packard collapsed, all those businesses lost customers. Many closed entirely. The unemployment rate in Trumbull County spiked. Poverty rates increased. Property values declined. The entire region suffered. The National Packard Museum remained as a memorial to what had been, displaying artifacts from the company's glory days. Visitors could see the Packard brothers' original patents, photographs of the massive Dana Street complex at its peak, examples of the innovations that had made Packard Electric the world's leading automotive electrical component manufacturer. But museums are for dead things. The museum's existence confirmed what everyone already knew. Packard Electric was history, not present or future. Some former Packard buildings were repurposed. The display group purchased and renovated Building 22, using it for event production and creative services. It was a small, bright spot in an otherwise bleak landscape. But one successfully renovated building couldn't compensate for millions of square feet of shuttered manufacturing space. The Warren that had thrived for nearly a century on Packard Electric's success had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of dependence on a single employer. When that employer cared only about quarterly earnings and had zero loyalty to the community that built it, disaster was inevitable. Packard Electric hadn't just left Warren, it had gutted Warren, extracted a century's worth of profits, then discarded the workers and community who'd created those profits like used machinery. And what was left? Empty buildings, broken promises, and a generation of workers who'd believed that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded. They'd been wrong. 2017 to 2025. Warren, Ohio. The remaining Delphi operations underwent yet another corporate transformation. In January 2018, the company split into two separate entities. Delphi Technologies, focused on propulsion systems, and Aptiv plc, focused on advanced electronics and electrical distribution. The Warren facilities became part of Aptiv, though the distinction probably meant little to the few hundred remaining workers who'd survived every previous restructuring. Aptiv continued the pattern established decades earlier. Constant offshore expansion, continuous cost-cutting, perpetual restructuring. The company developed advanced vehicle electronics, sensors, connectors, data systems, autonomous vehicle components for the next generation of automobiles. Some of that work happened in Warren, but increasingly it happened wherever Aptiv could find the cheapest skilled labor. By 2024, the Warren operations consisted of 4 plants employing fewer than 700 workers total. Plant 7, Plant 10, and Plant 11 were consolidated into a single remaining building on North River Road. Plant 47 inches. Vienna Township continued producing plastic connectors. Everything else was gone, demolished, sold, or abandoned. The work these remaining plants performed was sophisticated. Plant 10 manufactured advanced cable for modern vehicles with complex electrical systems. Plant 11 operated as a metal stamping facility producing precision components. Plant 47 was the most efficient plastics molding plant in the world, according to union representatives. The surviving workers were highly skilled, well-trained, and productive. None of that mattered. Aptiv announced in early 2025 that Plant 10 would close, eliminating 63 jobs. The company continued operating 3 facilities for the moment, but everyone understood the trajectory. Each closure, each layoff, each restructuring moved in one direction, away from Warren. In November 2024, Aptiv sold the Champion Tech Center building for $9.4 million. The property had been Packard Electric's engineering center, the brain trust that developed innovations keeping the company on the cutting edge. Now, it was just real estate to be liquidated. Aptiv held a lease until 2029, but everyone knew they wouldn't use it that long. The union kept fighting, but they were negotiating the terms of decline rather than preventing it. IUE, CWA, Local 717 membership had dropped to approximately 660 workers. The union hall that once hosted thousands now served hundreds. Negotiations focused on securing decent severance packages and protecting remaining pensions rather than saving jobs. The war was over. They were just managing the retreat. Former workers watched from the sidelines, bitter but unsurprised. They'd seen this pattern repeat for 40 years. Promises of commitment to Warren, assurances that jobs were secure, claims that offshore expansion would strengthen domestic operations. All lies. Every time. The playbook never changed because it worked perfectly for corporate executives who collected bonuses for cutting costs while destroying communities. Current workers faced impossible decisions: stay and risk sudden closure with minimal severance, or take buyouts, accepting reduced retirement benefits. Both options were bad. There were no good choices when your employer had zero loyalty and your skills were specialized to an industry abandoning your region. The transformation from Packard Electric, a General Motors division, employing 14,500 inches Warren, to Aptiv plc, an international corporation, employing 660 inches Warren, was complete. What had taken a century to build had been dismantled in 4 decades of deliberate offshoring. And still, the corporate press releases insisted this was just normal business evolution and adapting to global competition, as if there was something inevitable about abandoning American workers to chase cheaper labor overseas, as if betrayal was just standard operating procedure, which, in modern American capitalism, it apparently was. 2025, Warren, Ohio. Visit Warren today, and you'll see the remnants of an industrial empire that once employed 14,500 people in a single city. The North River Road complex still stands, but vast sections sit empty. Buildings that once operated 3 shifts now have dark windows and overgrown parking lots. The Dana Street campus that expanded 12 times is mostly demolished, replaced by vacant lots where grass grows through cracked pavement. The National Packard Museum on Mahoning Avenue preserves the history. Inside, you can see James Ward Packard's original patents. Photographs of workers assembling wiring harnesses in the 1940s. Examples of the Packard cable that revolutionized automotive wiring. Displays showing the high-energy ignition system that powered GM engines for decades. The exhibits document a century of innovation, craftsmanship, and industrial achievement. What they don't show is the betrayal. The museum can't display the broken promises, the eliminated pensions, the destroyed healthcare benefits, the abandoned workers. Those aren't artifacts you can put behind glass. They're living wounds in a community still bleeding decades after the cuts were made. 3 lessons emerge from Packard Electric's collapse lessons that apply to every community dependent on a major employer. Every worker trusting corporate promises, every region watching manufacturing jobs disappear overseas. First, corporate loyalty is fiction. Packard Electric spent a century building trust in Warren. They hired generations of families. They promised security. They presented themselves as community partners. Then they abandoned Warren the moment labor costs somewhere else became cheaper. A century of community investment meant nothing compared to quarterly earnings reports. Workers who believed that loyalty would be reciprocated were systematically betrayed. The lesson: companies have zero loyalty to workers or communities. Zero. They will discard both without hesitation when profits demand it. Second, globalization benefits executives and shareholders, not workers. Delphi's offshore expansion made the company more profitable. It increased shareholder returns. It justified executive bonuses. The company succeeded by every Wall Street metric. Meanwhile, 14,000 Warren workers lost jobs, healthcare, and pensions. The community collapsed. The tax base evaporated. Globalization worked exactly as designed, concentrating wealth at the top while destroying working-class communities. The promised benefits of free trade and global competition? Workers never saw them. They saw unemployment lines. Third, once manufacturing leaves, it never comes back. The specialized knowledge that made Packard Electric dominant took a century to develop. Workers learned precision manufacturing from parents who learned from grandparents. Engineering expertise accumulated across generations. When that knowledge base was destroyed through layoffs and closures, it was gone forever. Warren can't recreate what took 100 years to build. The manufacturing infrastructure, the skilled workforce, the institutional knowledge, all lost. Offshoring isn't temporary. It's permanent economic destruction. The statistical summary is stark. Packard Electric operated in Warren from 1890 to present. Peak employment, 14,500 inches the 1980s. Current employment, approximately 660. Peak impact, economic engine for entire region. Current impact, minimal. Years of prosperity, 1890 to 1980, 90 years. Years of decline, 1980 to 2025, 45 years. The modern automotive industry still needs electrical components. Cars are more electronically sophisticated than ever. The demand for wiring harnesses, cables, and connectors has increased, not decreased. But that work happens in Mexico, China, India, anywhere but Warren, Ohio. American workers still want manufacturing jobs. The skills still exist. The work ethic remains. What's missing is employers willing to pay American wages and honor commitments to communities. What's left in Warren? Memories, museums, and empty buildings. A flag flying over a factory that betrayed everyone who worked there. And the bitter knowledge that it didn't have to be this way. As we approach the final chapters, if this content is valuable to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who would appreciate this story. American manufacturing collapse needs to be remembered. Walk through Warren, Ohio today and you'll pass the National Packard Museum. Its brick facade, a memorial to what once was. Inside are photographs of workers building wire harnesses in buildings that no longer exist. Display cases show the innovations that made Packard Electric the world leader in automotive electrical components. On the walls hang patents signed by James Ward Packard over a century ago. Step outside and look north, toward where the Dana Street complex once sprawled across multiple city blocks. Most of it is gone, demolished, or crumbling. The North River Road facilities still technically operate, but the parking lots tell the real story. Empty spaces where 14,500 workers once parked. Silent buildings where 3 shifts once ran continuously. A manufacturing empire reduced to a few hundred workers clinging to jobs that could disappear with the next corporate restructuring. If you examine what happened to Packard Electric, 3 warnings emerge for every American community. Corporate promises are worthless without accountability. Packard Electric spent decades assuring Warren workers that offshore expansion would protect domestic jobs. Every promise was broken. Every assurance was a lie. Without mechanisms to hold corporations accountable to communities they profit from, betrayal is inevitable. Words without consequences mean nothing. The race to the bottom has no winners except executives and shareholders. Delphi chased cheaper labor from Ohio to Mississippi to Mexico to China. At each stop, they promised the previous location that offshoring would strengthen operations. Each time, they closed facilities and eliminated jobs once they'd extracted everything valuable. Workers in Ciudad Juarez will eventually discover what Warren workers learned. When even cheaper labor emerges elsewhere, their jobs disappear too. Only the executives collecting bonuses for cost-cutting truly benefit. Manufacturing knowledge, once destroyed, cannot be easily rebuilt. Warren spent a century developing expertise in automotive electrical components. Generations of workers accumulated specialized skills. Engineering teams pioneered innovations. When that knowledge base was dismantled through layoffs and closures, it was permanently lost. You can't rebuild a century of institutional knowledge in a decade. The skills, the culture, the community, gone forever. The numbers tell an unambiguous story. From 1890 to 1980, Packard Electric rose from a 10-employee light bulb manufacturer to a 14,500-employee global leader in automotive electrical components. 90 years of growth, innovation, and community investment. From 1980 to 2025, the company systematically offshored work, eliminated jobs, and abandoned Warren. 45 years of decline, betrayal, and corporate restructuring. From 14,500 employees to 660. From regional economic engine to barely relevant. From community partner to corporate exploiter. What's the warning for businesses today? That Wall Street metrics and quarterly earnings can coexist with community devastation. That a company can technically succeed while destroying everything around it. That without fundamental changes to how we value labor, loyalty, and community impact, the Packard Electric story will repeat endlessly across America. Stand in Warren today, looking at empty factory buildings under a cold Ohio sky, and ask yourself, was this inevitable? Or was this a choice made by executives, enabled by policymakers, and accepted by a society that values shareholder returns over human dignity? The brightest lights went out. Nobody's turning them back on, and hundreds of American communities are next.